what we were really concerned with was a military threat from China. Why would you impose not a blockade or sanctions on particular kinds of military products, but tariffs, where you're saying, yes, the trade is still legal, we're just going to tax it?
If you thought of trade deficits as a problem, it would be the countries sending goods into America and getting paper dollars in return. If anyone was to think of themselves as getting screwed, it's not the people getting the goods who are getting screwed. It's the people who are getting the paper dollars that are so easy to print. They're the ones who are getting screwed.
And it's not like there's not been other presidents who've conjured up phony emergencies to justify economic powers. Notably, Biden did it during COVID to do something like cancel student loan debts, which Supreme Court rightly overturned. But this just seems particularly flagrant. He's using it now to declare sweeping new tariffs and controls over the economy.
We're drifting towards authoritarianism. I mean, I think of Trump as broadly whim-driven, like in everything he does, including acting as the president. He likes that people have to adjust to his whims. They have to sort of kneel before the king.
Trillions of dollars of market capitalization have been destroyed. Businesses are fighting for their life, all because of arbitrary government edicts, all to combat alleged threats from abroad. This time, though, the threat isn't a virus that threatens to kill people. It's cheap and plentiful goods manufactured by competitive producers. In response to that alleged threat, the Trump administration has now initiated the equivalent of a lockdown on trade, or at least they had done that just up until earlier today. It's April 9th. Trump has just now temporarily paused the worst of the tariffs that he imposed on the rest of the world, but he's still leaving it at a flat 10% and has raised China's to 125%. Even so, we should ask the question, how did this come about? What enabled this latest statist outrage from the Trump administration and resulting economic consequences? And is there any hope that it will change? Well, welcome to the Ayn Rand Institute podcast. I'm Ben Bayer. With me is ARI Senior Fellow Onkar Ghate. Hi, Onkar.
Hi, Ben.
So I started by drawing some parallels between this latest economic intervention by the Trump administration and what happened during COVID. What do you think of that comparison?
Yeah, I think it's a good comparison. That it's the people, I think, were shocked and surprised during COVID to learn how integrated the global economy is. I mean, why it really is now a global economy with so much trade that is international across borders. So when it was with COVID and countries either closing or severely restricting the flow of goods, people, trade across borders to try to contain the virus or stop its spread or protect themselves from getting it, what people saw was that supply chains are global. They go through so many countries, and if something uses one or two parts that now you can't get that product anymore. And people were really surprised, I think, and shocked by how much it was. Oh, really? Like if the global trade either disappears or just is severely restricted, all these goods are impacted by that. And it's part of why you had runs and shortages during COVID. Now that was in response to a virus, and that, like, how significant this is, even though, as you said at the opening, some of it has been or put on pause. Part of the story, in which we'll be talking about, is that how you put it, like, this is arbitrary, how whim-based this is, and how destructive. Like, this is not some small issue. This is that someone can throw a monkey wrench into global trade. That's a significant issue, and one of the issues should be that people should be talking about, and there's not nearly enough discussion about this, and it's part of what we'll talk about, is how can one person have this much power? And so like this is a shocking event, both like figuratively and literally. It's literally shocking the global economy, and it should be shocking that a person has this much power.
Yeah, so what could possibly justify that? We should talk about some of the alleged justifications, the rationalizations that are being used to inflict these tariffs on us. And as we said, this time the threat from abroad isn't a virus. It's a whole laundry list of other kinds of economic and political considerations. They're still saying, whatever the threat, we need to take some bitter medicine to deal with it. The first of these threats, of course, and it was the first set of tariffs that Trump imposed, were tariffs against China. And Onkar, here, I think that in certain ways is this the more complicated case to deal with, because China is a real kind of military threat. It's an authoritarian regime. It was once communist. It's nowadays, I think, more on the fascist model. Certainly building up its military in a way that is competitive with ours. And so there's a real foreign policy question here about how should the United States deal with China. But at least my initial thought, and I'm interested to hear what you think about this, is that if what you have is a genuine military threat that needs to be opposed, I mean, there are ways in which trade should be restricted when you're dealing with a military threat. I mean, the most obvious kind of case was something like Cuban Missile Crisis, where the Soviets are putting nuclear missiles in Cuba, and they can take out American cities all along the eastern seaboard. And what does Kennedy do? He puts Cuba under a blockade. And so there's disallowing trade from any other nation with Cuba, because there's a military threat and you don't want anyone to aid and abet that threat. But if what we were really concerned with was a military threat from China, why would you impose not a blockade or sanctions on particular kinds of military products, but tariffs, where you're saying, yes, the trade is still legal, we're just going to tax it? To me, that doesn't seem like tariffs are a foreign policy tool. Sanctions, blockades, embargoes, those are foreign policy tools. And if what we're dealing with China is a real foreign policy issue, tariffs are not the appropriate tool. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. That and we already do have certain trade restrictions. There's certain kinds of things you can't sell to China because they're worried about, well, this has military use and they're just going to take it and put it into their military, and that will be helping to develop their military. But what you wouldn't do is say, well, yeah, you can do this, but the government's going to take a cut from this. Like that is, I mean, it really is crazy to think like that is stopping a military threat. So this justification is, it's true that China is a threat. So I don't think there's any question that China is a military threat to the U.S. in the sense it's the emerging second power in the world. It's as you said, it's authoritarian and fascist. It exploits and deprives of freedom its own citizens, and will do that abroad. Will export that abroad. So it's clearly a threat. But precisely because it's a threat, you have to deal with it as a threat, not make it sort of a show. Oh yeah, that we're dealing with it by taking a cut of trade that comes to and from China. That's not taking it seriously as a threat. So in some ways it's worse than doing nothing. Because if you were doing nothing, then people would say, look, China's a threat and we're not doing anything about it. But this makes it seem, and I've heard this from many Trump supporters, he's tough on China. But this is not what it would look like to be tough on China. So I think it's worse than doing nothing.
Yes, I think we could have a whole separate conversation just about the failures of our foreign policy with regard to China, going all the way back to Nixon, coddling it in various ways, refusing to name it as an enemy, refusing to recognize Taiwan. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things we should be doing before tariffs or any kind of trade measures to begin to deal with. First, you have to identify the threat, which we've hardly been willing to do. I don't know if you have any further thoughts before we talk about the rest of the justifications for tariffs, just about Chinese foreign policy.
Yeah, so I agree. Like, this is a whole big subject, and the issue of Taiwan is an important issue. It's connected to how, well, both the Trump administration and Biden administration dealt with that. It's a further, with Ukraine, or not dealt with the situation, that when you read now about Taiwan, they've looked at what happened to Ukraine, and a good thing is that it's actually woken them up in some ways, that we can't rely, we might get some support, but it won't be significant support, so we have to be able to defend themselves. And there's a lot of interaction between Taiwan and Ukraine now, of Taiwanese going and studying what Ukraine has been doing and how they've been able to resist. And if we don't think of Taiwan as an ally, you're not going to think of China, and you won't understand the threat of China, because part of its threat is its threat against Taiwan.
So let's talk about some of the other rationalizations for these tariffs. Certainly, we talked about if you're viewing China as a military threat, you don't view taxing its trade as a source of revenue. And yet that is also one of the big ways in which these tariffs are being sold, that we should rely less on the income tax, more on tariffs, as we did in the late 19th century. And Trump is a big fan of William McKinley's policies here. What's your take on tariffs, on that kind of rationalization?
I think it's as you put it, it's a rationalization, because it's a fantasy. Because if you took that seriously, that the better way to raise revenue would be import taxes, not income taxes. Like, if that was a serious position, then you would be simultaneously, we're lowering to phase out the income tax, and we're raising import taxes, and this will be a better form of taxation. Now, there's economic argument, is that true? And so, but that would be a coherent policy. And what's really important would be that it not be chaotic. So part of the market reaction, and you would put it, the trillions of market cap have evaporated as the market goes down. Part of it, and many businessmen and commentators have said that, is the uncertainty and chaos of it. So how long are these tariffs going to last? Or are some going to be put on pause? Some will put on pause today. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody can plan. And the whole thing here would be, no, we're changing the way government raises revenue, so the way it taxes, and we're going to make it crystal clear so that everybody could plan. We're going to try to phase out the income tax in 5 years or 8 years, and we're going to slowly raise tariffs, import taxes, because that's, so a percentage of the revenue's going to go down from income tax to, and then if they really want to eliminate it, to zero. And this is going to rate, like, you would have a whole plan so that people could plan and businesses would know what's happening. And we have the complete opposite of that. And so this is not a serious proposal about we should change the way government raises revenue and taxes. It's a whimsical, arbitrary controls.
I think that another point here, if you were serious about using it as a source of revenue, would be that you would also have serious proposals for cutting spending, because if we were able to fund a government in the 19th century with nothing but tariff revenue, it was probably something to do with the fact that the government was spending quite a lot less money on welfare entitlements and so forth, and yet there are no serious proposals on the table for doing anything like that.
Yeah, nobody seriously thinks you could eliminate the income tax and replace it with import taxes for the reason you say, given the current size and spending of government.
And another justification that has been given, which is notably contradictory with the previous justification, is no, we're not actually aiming to have perpetual tariffs. Trump just wants to threaten them through his 4D chess in order to convince other countries to come to the bargaining table and to lower their tariffs. Thoughts on this one?
Yeah, well, as you said, so Trump, both in the campaign and now in office, has said he loves tariffs. It's his favorite word in the English language. And that it's a negotiating tactic is the opposite of that. It's, I don't like tariffs. I don't like when other countries use tariffs. We're going to do this in order to get them to lower tariffs. That's would be somebody who hates tariffs, and I'm trying to get rid of them. And the short-term pain is, well, we have to give people a dose of their own medicine in order to eliminate this. And how do you square that with, well, I love tariffs and that's what we should be doing, and I don't know why we ever went to the income tax stuff. And that just, it indicates the unseriousness of the justifications, and part of why they think they're just rationalizations. I want to do this, I have to have some kind of justification, so let me fish around for a justification. And then you can get so obviously contradictory ones, like tariffs are the greatest thing, and I'm doing this in order to eliminate tariffs because they're bad. It's like, how serious is this as a, if you one's taking it as a honest justification, if you're going to give both of those simultaneously?
And I think what gives the lie to that rationalization is that when certain of our trading partners offered to completely eliminate their tariffs, notably Israel and Argentina, I mean, Milei in Argentina had been planning to do this anyway because he was a big pro-free trader. That didn't help them. It is that they're still going to be subject to this baseline 10% tariff, regardless of whatever goodwill they've shown. So there's clearly something else motivating it besides the idea of it's a negotiating tactic. One place you can look for more of what the maybe actual motivation is if you read the text of the executive order, the one that came out on April 2nd. I mean, it's rather lengthy, and there's quite a lot in there about how it's really about protecting the American manufacturing base. That the fact that there are trade deficits with these other countries means that the fact that we're not exporting as much as they do means that we're not manufacturing as much. We're losing our manufacturing base. That's a kind of national security threat, they say, because, well, you need to have a manufacturing base if you want to arm the country for a future war. Thoughts on this one?
It's the plausibility comes from, as you said, from the collectivism of it. If you're actually believe in the individual and that trade is among individuals, what this amounts to is we're going to sacrifice some people for the sake of others. And all these collectivist justifications, and when you scratch this about manufacturing jobs and so on, there's been some supposed losers of the global economy in America. Now and they've been victims, and now everybody's going to have to sacrifice for them. And so, people are not going to be able to trade. Businesses are going to close or shrivel. Other people are going to lose jobs, but somehow manufacturing is going to come back to America. And it's also, it's collectivistic, but it's also economically fantasy, in the sense that this kind of investment happens over years and really decades and that you're going to do this, and you're going to do this for, we might need 90 days, and so it doesn't fit at all the whimsical nature of what they're doing. But it also, it's a form of protectionism, and there's a sense in which protectionism can work. Like if you put and keep high tariffs, more things will be manufactured in America because it's too expensive to import them. But what that means is just the individuals in America are able to be less productive. Because you're not able to trade with people who you would want to trade. You're not able to work with people you would want to work. You don't have the kind of division of labor that you would want to have if you were free to have it. So you settle for something that's second and third best. And it's like because unions are just another form of protectionism in the way they existed in modern America. And it's not like, okay, nothing's made it's union made, and it's not as good, and it's more expensive. I mean, why did people start buying Japanese cars? Because the unions had so much power over the American automobile companies. And it's not like, oh, you couldn't get them. It's just they weren't very reliable. They were more expensive. I'd rather have a Japanese car that's more reliable, more fuel efficient. So it was just better. And that's what, like, if you stop that, people won't necessarily see all the things that they could have had. But it doesn't change the fact that you could have had much better things, and you now no longer will have them because we have a protectionist form of economic controls that are sacrificing you to other people. I mean, that's what it amounts to.
I mean, you mentioned unions, and much of the power that unions have in our economy today is not a result of voluntary bargaining with employers, but forced collective bargaining laws imposed from above. And you'd think that if one were serious about enabling manufacturing in this country where it really could add value, one thing you'd be looking at would be, well, what kind of regulations, such as labor regulations, environmental regulations, safety regulations, among others, may have made manufacturing so expensive in this country that that our companies had to seek sources overseas instead. But there have, once again, been no realistic proposals for slashing these kinds of regulations. At one point, it was said that the Elon Musk's Doge was going to look at that when Vivek Ramaswamy was on board, but he left, and that seems to have been eliminated from their agenda. The other issue that strikes me about this kind of protectionist justification, and we'll talk about some of this more when we look at the legal authority that's been cited, but if the idea is somebody in power wants there to be a certain form of economy, wants to have a certain mix of manufacturing with services, wants to protect the alleged manufacturing base for whatever reasons, and that's sufficient to justify this arbitrary set of taxes and price controls. It's hard to imagine how you couldn't justify just simple dictatorial control over the entire economy. I think that's what you were getting at with regard to how collectivistic this is. If for the sake of quote unquote national security, common good, etc., kind of considerations, you can exercise this much arbitrary power over people's lives, and it really is doing that. I mean, why wouldn't that justify some kind of dictatorship? And Trump is pulling back a bit from it, but it's a truly stunning kind of justification that you wouldn't expect to come from a representative of the party that's supposed to stand for free enterprise. It sounds much more like the new old left Marxist central planning mentality that you would expect from Democrats from decades and decades ago.
Yeah, though that form of the Republican Party is unfortunately long gone. Even they didn't do very often things that were pro-free trade, but it was still part of their rhetoric. That's part of it has gone with the Trump takeover of the Republican Party. And what's revealing is, so tariffs are they're import taxes. So this is what is being proposed is a massive tax increase. That's what's being put on the books, and then Trump's going to decide if he's going to pause it and so on. But it's massive tax increase. So if being for free trade is too abstract, there's still supposedly like, oh, we want to lower taxes. And if Biden was doing this, it would be all over. What he's doing is raising taxes. This is crazy. We told you they're tax and spend Democrats and so on. That Trump is doing it, and they'll call it tariffs, but they're just import taxes. So a massive tax increase, and the pushback from Republicans, who they'll still say, yeah, they were for lowering taxes and so on, is there's no pushback. And you can tell for many of them, they are against this, but they won't say anything. And that, in terms of that, there's arbitrary power here, and that they're both scared of being voted out of office, but they're also scared of Trump and what he might do to people who criticize him. And that's part of the atmosphere here, because what has been put on is just a massive tax increase. That's what it is.
Now, another justification that's been offered for these tariffs, and it was cited if in particular in the ones that were imposed on Canada and Mexico, is the importation of fentanyl into the economy, other dangerous drugs, and of course illegal immigration, a perpetual concern of the Trump administration. Why is that supposed to be a justification for tariffs, and is it any good?
Well, we have to stop the flow of fentanyl, and I think particularly the fentanyl one is, again, if one's thinking of it from the point of view of what Republicans say, and sometimes do, this is such an atrocious justification that we have to stop the flow of fentanyl because we have people who are taking fentanyl and whatever, getting sick, some dying, losing their jobs, and so on. But if you think of the way for things that they dislike, what they'll say, so the two that really spring to mind for me are, it's for vaccines, so it was really around COVID, but it's more broadly for vaccine. Like, people should decide for themselves whether they take vaccines or not. This is not for government to dictate and to control. And when gun control comes up, they will say, well, look, guns don't kill people with guns, and they're the ones you have to worry about. Here, like, fentanyl doesn't kill people. It's people who abuse fentanyl, who have become addicted to drugs, and so on. And the idea that the whole economy is at the mercy of these people, that it's, look, we've got drug addicts, and we've got to do something, and it's too easy for them to get drugs, so we're going to destroy trillions of dollars of trade and of economic productivity for the sake of drug addicts. That's like altruism on steroids. And they say simultaneously want to, we're going to stop U.S. aid, but what we're going to do is like massive aid for drug users, and the aid is like halting production. It's that anybody can accept that as a justification is, it's really beyond me that's you're going to sacrifice that much of the economy because there's drug users and drug abusers, and you think that, like, that's a good justification for what you're doing?
And now, we already touched on this a little bit, but I want to circle back to it because I think it's worth dwelling on. When we talked about the protectionist justifications, the need to protect industry, usually the way the protectionists measure the responses that are needed, and there's some kind of formula the Trump administration released that did this, is in terms of the trade deficit, the difference between the sum of our exports and our imports. And I mean, I think there's a lot to say about what's wrong about that concept, but I think you have special observations about it too.
Yeah, so if you took trade deficits seriously, I don't think they should be taken seriously in the way that they're thought of. And people have pointed out, like, this is trade deficit in goods that they're particularly focused on. But for many of these countries, when you look at the trade, well, the U.S. has a surplus in services. And that's because we're particularly good in services. So we import goods and export services, like, say, so much of high tech is what they're offering is services. But if you thought of trade deficits as a trade deficit in good as a problem, the problem would run in exactly the other direction. It would be the countries that are sending, they're trading, so this is not even accurate to put it, but sending goods into America and getting paper dollars in return, they're the ones who should think of themselves. If anyone was to think of themselves as getting screwed, they're the ones. Like, we're giving up cars and electronics and so on, and we're getting paper dollars that the U.S. government just keeps printing. like we're the ones who are being taken advantage of. Now, that's not accurate. But if you thought of it, it's not the people getting the goods who are getting screwed. It's the people who are getting the paper dollars that are so easy to print. They're the ones who are getting screwed. So it's very revealing that it's, oh no, it's the people. We're getting all these goods from all over the world. Look how we're being exploited. To think of it like that is you have to have such a warped understanding of business. And I think this fits Trump to a T. And that this is part of what is, I think, driving this whole focus of his. And this, on some issues, like abortion, I think it was much more his base was pushing that. And so, I'll do this, and I want to be seen as conservative. And so this, I think, is coming from Trump. That the tariffs are, it's accurate that he loves tariffs and that he thinks of this as we're being exploited. And if you think of him as so much of his business was hawking goods that are no good, that he knows at some level are no good, and he's looking for suckers to buy it. And whether it's the meme coin or it's the world's greatest steaks. Now, nobody believed that they were the world's greatest steaks, including Trump. But like, if I can market it like this, and if I'm really good at marketing and putting my name on it, I can get people to buy it. So the suckers are the people getting the goods. These steaks that are probably average, or maybe they were below average, marketed as the world's greatest steaks. That's what people think they're buying. And they're sending their hard-earned money, and they're getting like these worthless products in return. If you think of trade like that, then the people getting the goods are the suckers, and the people getting the money are the people who are exploiting that. And then if you just blow that up to the global level, it's, we're getting all the goods, then it must be things like Trump steaks and meme coins. So we're getting screwed, and we're sending our money over, so they're the ones who are taking advantage of this. And if you think of it like that, it explains that from a different perspective, is just inexplicable how you could think we're getting all these goods from around the world, so somehow people around the world are screwing us.
Yeah, I think another aspect of the obsession with trade deficits here, I don't think this one is particularly Trump's. I think this part of it is too intellectual for him, but probably some of his advisors, you can say the following thing about him. I'm thinking of Peter Navarro, that this obsession with the trade deficit which is what it is in fact is a difference between two aggregates of total value of exports minus total value of imports. And there's real serious questions about whether this is even a meaningful economic figure. But one thing that struck me was that it is not much more meaningful, perhaps even less meaningful, than something like the Marxist idea of surplus value. And it operates in the same way. The Marxists thought that the capitalists pay an aggregate sum of wages to their workers, and then they sell the products that the workers make for more. And the difference is surplus value, and that's thought of as exploitative. And if you think about it, it works the same way with the way that today's trade warriors think about deficits. They take these two aggregate quantities, total supply, so total exports minus total imports, and they call it a form of exploitation. And for all kinds of reasons, it's not actually exploitation. Everybody who buys goods from another country gets the goods, and when we sell our goods, we get money in exchange. Just like with Marx, it's not actually exploitation because the workers are getting paid and the capitalists are actually adding lots of value. But because they have the fancy equations that show this disparity, they then characterize it as a kind of exploitation. And if anything, the protectionist version of it is more collectivistic because you're now taking sums across an entire economy and comparing them to each other, as opposed to where at least the Marxist is comparing the inputs and outputs for a single capitalist. I just find that incredibly collectivistic thinking.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there's no magic in aggregation. So if you can understand that at an individual transaction level, that when you engage in trade, it's both sides are benefiting. It's not like one gets a credit and one's got a deficit. And no aggregating of trade can get you to, what's really happening is one side's winning and the other side's losing. The whole thing about trade and why it's like trade wars in an important sense is an oxymoron. Trade's the opposite of war. War is win-lose. Trade is both sides are winning. And when you aggregate trade, all it means is that there's a lot of wins happening. You can't suddenly go to, oh no, what's really happening is one side's winning and the other side's losing.
Yeah, our colleague Don Watkins on Twitter made a very good point that what they're calling a trade war is really a war on trade. And that's the parallel to, this is why it's a form of economic lockdown in essence.
Yeah.
So we should talk about the legal aspect of this. I'm working on an article on this subject, and there's been a lot of debate about the executive orders the president has been enacting since his inauguration. When I look at the legal questions about these orders, I've often found, well, there's at least a kind of semi-plausibility to the legal justification he's citing. But when it comes to these tariffs, I don't even find it halfway plausible. There's not even a veneer of plausibility that there's legal justification. Many have already pointed this out. April 2nd tariffs and the ones on Canada and Mexico before, the one thing that he's citing to justify all of them legally is this International Economic Powers Act. And that is the act that gives the president the power to declare a national emergency whenever there's a threat to the nation's national security, to its foreign policy, or to its economy. And the main thing that the critics point out is that the text of the law itself says nothing at all about the president's ability to impose tariffs. This is a part of the Trading with the Enemies Act, which does give the president power when there's a certain kind of emergency to impose trade restrictions, embargoes, sanctions, the kind of things we talked about before. But there's nothing at all about imposing tariffs. The Constitution gives Congress the power to impose tariffs. So the most flagrant legal infraction here seems to be the act doesn't say anything about tariffs, but this is all about tariffs, what he's doing now. And furthermore, the act, of course, says there's got to be an emergency. And well, okay, the president has declared an emergency, but the ostensible problems, the importation of drugs, illegal immigration, trade deficits, these are things that have been with us for decades, if not forever. And so the idea that this is an emergency is just it's completely preposterous. And it's not like there's not been other presidents who've conjured up phony emergencies to justify economic powers. Notably, Biden did it during COVID to do something like cancel student loan debts, which Supreme Court rightly overturned. But this just seems particularly flagrant. The emergency is something that's been happening since the beginning of the Republic, and he's using it now to declare sweeping new tariffs and controls over the economy. And what are your thoughts on this one, Onkar?
Yeah, I agree that there's no plausibility. There's not even a veneer of plausibility that we're in an emergency that warrants massive executive power. And it's part of why I think it's significant, and will Republicans oppose, will they say anything in opposition to what Trump is doing? Will they say that this is a massive tax increase and that there's fear and that there's reasons for the fear that go beyond that just, well, the base might turn on me and I won't be reelected? The way that Trump is going after opponents, with the Justice Department, with threatening, like with the law firms and threatening, well, we're going to go after your clients if we don't like what the cases you're taking and so on. So a law firm now is thinking about, well, I might go out of existence if my clients say, well, I can't risk the president of the United States and the executive branch coming after us because we've hired you as lawyers, we're going to hire somebody else as lawyers. So like this really can destroy a firm, and that he's willing to do these kinds of things, really open investigations against congressmen who speak up against him and so on. And like that, everybody has this kind of calculation. Some will be more far-fetched and some will be more realistic, but that this is in everybody's mind makes it that it's, I've declared an emergency, and are you going to try to counter that and say, like as a congressman or whatever, and say, no, we don't regard this as an emergency. And are you willing to take the pain that I might inflict on you if you do that? Like, so that's part of the atmosphere in which we're in. Like, I think many of the Republicans are cowards. But some, I think there's a calculation of, is it worth it now, maybe in a month from now or something, of saying something and risking that Trump gets mad and might hold a grudge, and then he'll try to do something about that grudge. So this granting of emergency powers, even if it was legitimate, has to be done in a very different way than this. And the Congress really has to worry anytime it does something like this, that like what happens if there's an abuse of the power, and what could you do to rein in that abuse? So it's, I mean, this unfortunately is another element of why it's right. We're drifting towards authoritarians.
Yeah, there's no question this is not all the president's fault, that it's also the Congress's fault, which has been derelict in asserting its constitutional powers and rights, that the IEEPA, among other acts, have all delegated various powers that should have been those of Congress to the president, and delegated them in a way that is particularly ripe for abuse by authoritarians. So here, I found the text. The way the IEEPA is written is just in such extraordinarily non-objective language that it invites this kind of abuse by statists and collectivists. So it says the president has the power to deal with any unusual and extraordinary threat to national security, foreign policy, or the economy of the United States if the president declares national emergency with respect to such threat. And so obvious questions include, what is an unusual and extraordinary threat? No standards are given in the act. And the fact that it's not just a threat to national security, but to foreign policy and to the economy. I mean, so if our foreign policy is to annex Greenland and the Denmark decides to object to that, does that by itself justify declaring a national emergency and cordoning off Denmark? And we already talked about the way in which the just anything that's a threat to the so-called economy can serve as justification for emergency, and it's so open-ended. That's really where the potential for just economic dictatorship comes from. Yes, there's a reason why presidents should need to oppose emergency military threats, and we talked about cases where, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, he should have the power to do that. But this law needs to be repealed and rewritten, I think, if Congress wants to reassert its authority, so as not to make this kind of power so open-ended as to never be closed.
Yeah, so there's a massive default, or worse, I mean, actively handing the executive power from Congress, and this is really led by the Democrats. The Republicans help with it, and now are more than eager to, the president has this kind of power to say that. But the people who think of themselves as opponents of Trump and Republicans and the right wing, they should see, like, it's we who've done this. We've given the executive this kind of power. But it's also the Supreme Court has defaulted, or worse, in regard to this. Like, the whole form of American government for the last 100+ years has been to give more and more power to the executive branch at the cost of power to Congress and to the Supreme Court. And the judicial branch as such. You're putting that this rightly, that these laws are so vague that you can't understand what power has been granted from Congress to the president. And functioning judicial system would declare many laws invalid because vague. That is, it's this law, you can't understand what this grants power to the executive, what it doesn't, as you were saying, like what's unusual, how long does an emergency have to be, so this kind of law should be no. If you want to grant some of your power to the executive, it has to be much more clear than this, because we can't enforce this because we don't understand it, and many more laws would be struck down. It doesn't mean like you couldn't have a law, something like this, but they would be struck down for vagueness and go back to the drawing board and draft a law and create a law that is intelligible to everyone, including us as judges. And that like so rarely happens now. And that's another form of granting power to the executive, that it is, well, I mean, we say we have this authority, and who's going to tell us that we don't?
And we've said that this kind of law opens the doors for authoritarians, and insofar as Trump has been running with it for the last week, we've, I think, really seen that authoritarianism of his ruling style come out, and the way I think it manifests most obviously is the way he in effect brags about people having to come supplicate themselves to himself. He just did a talk that I saw the other day where he says all the countries are calling me up and begging, and he's relishing the fact that they're having to supplicate themselves to himself. This is, of course, not the only aspect of it. There's ways in which domestic companies have to do the same thing, that if they want to get an exemption for the tariff, they have to lobby, they have to beg and plead. Further thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important part of that we're drifting towards authoritarianism. I mean, I think of Trump as broadly whim-driven, like in everything he does, including acting as the president. But I think more broadly, when you see him as a public persona, it's so whim-driven, and that this is, and it's, oh, we're going to have tariffs. They might be massive. You're going to have to wait and see, and then we might pause them and might change them. I want to be able to function on whim, and he likes that people have to adjust to his whims. That's part of so that they have to sort of kneel before the king. I don't think of him as a person craving power, but he craves the spotlight, and he craves that everybody has to take him into account. He's not an insignificant nobody. You have to take into account his latest whims, and that's part of so countries calling him, business people calling him. And when you look at some of the tariffs imposed, they're so nonsensical or worse that like even for the sort of rationalized justification. So the justifications that, well, we have to give some justification, let us pull something. You can't fit many of the tariffs under this, but you can fit. Trump is whim-driven, and he likes and admires people who are whim-driven and seem to have been able to make people scared of them. So, like, his love for dictators, I think it's revealing. It's a certain kind of dictator. It's a dictator who's whim-driven. It's a Putin, or it's North Korea's dictator. It's not Xi of China. That's too much. There's policy there. There's a long-term strategy. You don't have to feel like it's under the whim of one person. It ultimately is under the whim of a person, but it's much more. There's a whole party apparatus that functions, and that's all too much work, too much trouble, too much planning for Trump. So that there's a whim-driven aspect to it. That's part of the attraction here. And I mean, it's shameful, but part of the tariffs, there's no tariff on Russia. There's a tariff on Ukraine. And this is, but like, why is there no tariff on Russia? He likes Putin. And why is there a tariff on Ukraine? He doesn't really like them. He doesn't like Zelensky. And that's this is, yeah, and I get to indulge my whims. And maybe Zelensky will have to come and crawl to me and ask that we do. Like, that's part of the whole atmosphere here. And it's a significant part of the whole atmosphere. And it's part of what it means. It's like we're drifting, or worse, into authoritarianism. Because this is what an authoritarian regime, particularly when it's not ideologically based, what it looks like.
We should spend a little bit of time talking about just the economic destructiveness of these tariffs, especially when they are so whimsical, especially when the plans for rolling them out changes from day to day, from week to week, and we've had another big change today. This is one of the things that's led many commentators I've read to say the ones that were unveiled on April 2nd were much worse than were even expected, because they weren't what the Trump administration was saying they would be. He was originally, about a month ago, saying, we, I think, talked about this in our last podcast together, they were going to be only against the 15 worst offenders, the so-called Dirty 15. Instead, he decides to target everybody in the world with a flat 10% tariff, regardless of what kind of trade policy they have, and then uses this bizarre trade deficit-based formula to ratchet up from that, sometimes as high as 60-70%. And so it's just and now he walks some of it back today, leading to further uncertainty because it's only a 90-day pause, and who knows what will happen after that. So it's just an ongoing recipe for market turmoil. And market is up today after he walked some of it back, but at a certain point, as of, I think, Friday, since Inauguration Day, the market capitalization of the markets had come down by $11 trillion. Now that's just another aggregate of different paper values, so it's hard to know exactly what to make of it. It's not like one person suffered all that loss, but I think the more important considerations to look at are just the concrete implications for the actual doing of business. And we know, of course, from market capitalization, that's a sign of something for business. We know it means that the market is betting that a whole bunch of companies are going to lose money and or go out of business, because it's based on what kind of dividends they can expect to return. And the market is betting, wow, they're going to lose profits because of these tariffs for one reason or another. And you can see why in so many different kinds of cases. There are companies that moved their production from China to other countries in Southeast Asia on the expectation that China was going to be hit by tariffs. And then Trump comes along and says, actually, no, we're going to put whatever 60% something on Vietnam. I think it was 70% something on Vietnam. Toy companies like Hasbro and Mattel were particularly hard hit here. Any kind of company a domestic company that relies crucially on imports, garment manufacturers, coffee roasters. I mean, you can't grow coffee beans in the United States. If you want to drink coffee, you have to import it. So some of these smaller roasting companies were just threatened existentially by these tariffs. I read an account of a maker of baby gear that lost its entire contract with Walmart because Walmart's MO is to keep prices down for consumers, and so it will just cut off suppliers who don't have the means of keeping costs below a certain threshold. In this particular case, like, not only could they not make the materials for the baby carriers in the United States, but even the machines that manufacture these materials are made also in Asia, and so you'd have to import the machines, and that would be economically unfeasible. I just want to read one particular account I read. It really kind of brings this down to earth. This is from Vogue Business. Catherine Tash, the owner of Catherine Tash Bridal, hand makes all of her wedding dresses in her Santa Monica atelier, but she sources silks from Korea. hit with 25% tariffs, and lace from Italy and France hit with 20% tariffs, and the UK, 10% tariffs. Quote, we're reviewing our sourcing strategy. We've been on the phone all morning with all sources, trying to keep calm and remaining committed to continuing the quality of our work, Tash said on Thursday. She says she's determined not to increase prices, but acknowledges her margins will take a blow. I care so much about preserving the quality of our business and the garments that we make, and I don't want to panic. We want to keep our business. It's a survival test, and it feels like we just did this during COVID, which goes back to what we were commenting on before.
Yeah, it's very sad. It feels like we just did this with COVID because they just did that with COVID. That this is what they had to do. So it's so many businesses have to try to adjust, and that it's whim-based is an important aspect of the whole phenomenon. So, and many market commentators have said the market does not like chaos. Another way of putting it does not like to have to act on whim or to respond to people's whims. So you brought up of people and companies shifting from China to Vietnam, thinking that, okay, there's animosity against China, that there's tariffs being put on. Both like Trump administration, Biden, Democrats, Republicans seem to want to do this. So they can think like sort of long range. Okay, yeah, there's going to be tariffs against China. There's not going to be for Vietnam. We're going to shift production. Shifting production is not like we moved a week ago and now we're doing that's like over years making that kind of shifts. And many companies started doing this kind of thing. But that's thinking, okay, there might be a policy we don't like, but it's stable and predictable, and we'll try as best we can to adjust to it. When you have this kind of thing that is not stable and predictable, it is so much harder to figure out how to produce in that environment. And so the destruction of production is so much greater in an environment where people rightly think, like, this is chaos and whim. I don't know what it will be next week, let alone next month from now. Will there be still tariffs? Will they have doubled or tripled? Will there be a pause on it? And how do you function? A producer does not function on whim. He functions with a long-range perspective, and that's what he can't do. And this is really, like, this is a dictatorial aspect of the authoritarianism. And it's something that Ayn Rand commented on, that if you think what dictators do is they establish really draconian laws, but that are predictable, the punishments are understandable, and so you don't understand how a dictatorship functions. It deliberately has whim-based policies so that people, the whole thing they have to orient around is what will be the latest whim of the dictator. And so their whole orientation has to turn to that, not to thinking about production and dealing with the world. It's what's the next thing that's going to cross this crazy person's mind that I have to try to learn to live with. And that's real fear, and it's such a destruction of the producer's mentality. And that's what people are feeling right now, and it's part of what the turmoil and chaos is. And it's so evil. But from the perspective of the American system, it should be, how have we as people allowed the government to become such that it can be driven by the whims of a single person?
Yeah. Last thing I think we should talk about is what, if any, reasons there may be to think there's some hope that this could get reversed. Already this morning, we found that Trump put the worst of some of these tariffs on pause, but still keeping 10% for the rest of the world. So I think it's still hardly enough of a reversal. Where is there hope for progress? Well, I know that there are now lawsuits finally that are being filed against the Trump administration for some of the kinds of legal reasons we talked about. There's a group called the New Civil Liberties Alliance that found a plaintiff who manufactures using imported goods and is suing against the initial round of China, Canada, Mexico tariffs that were imposed. that they point out that, as we talked about, that there's no basis in law in the IEEPA law that Trump is citing. They even, I think, very rightly point out that if you read that law to endorse tariff powers, then that would mean the law would have to be unconstitutional because that is actually a power of Congress. I know other groups that are looking to start lawsuits against the April 2nd tariffs. We'll see if they find plaintiffs soon enough for that to make any difference. Not sure where those cases will go or what will happen if they go to the Supreme Court. It'll be interesting to see. But there have also been other objections. There have been at least a handful of GOP politicians finally starting to speak out against Trump in a pretty strident way, at least on the subject of the tariffs. Rand Paul, a senator from Kentucky, gave a 30-minute speech before Congress denouncing the tariffs. Representative Don Bacon in the House from Nebraska has said that he would initiate a bill to take the tariff authority back from the president in the way that he's interpreted it. Again, I don't know if these votes will go anywhere, and of course the president can always veto them, so there would need to be a 2/3 majority will in both houses of Congress to really take it back from the president. One imagines that there's been a lot of political behind-the-scenes negotiations in connection with the latest budget deal, perhaps. Today's reversal had something to do with that. And then you've got at least some business people who are starting to speak out. Prominent investors like Bill Ackman, CEO of Chase, Jamie Dimon, even Elon Musk, who had, of course, been working closely with the president in the last few days on X, has been speaking up in favor of free trade and against tariffs. Anecdotally, I see at least a handful of conservatives and libertarians who I know on social media who supported Trump the most recent election, having second thoughts about that decision in light of what's been done with these tariffs. What common to many of these people is that they were surprised that Trump went as far with these tariffs as he did. Onkar, do you think they should have been surprised?
Yeah, I think it's crazy to be surprised by. I mean, he ran on this, he campaigned on it, he was serious when he said, I love tariffs, and he thinks of them as some kind of magic that how people are so stupid for how they act, and why did we ever get rid of tariffs? Why did we go to an income tax? So there's a kind of magic around it, and a lot of his thinking has a magical element to it. And then it gives him control, allows him to pick winners and losers. So the idea that he wasn't going to impose tariffs this time, I think you had to be kidding yourself or fooling yourself to really have thought that. So it's still good if people now come to say, well, that's bad. And some self-reflection of, should I have known this and could I have known this before? But it's better to realize it now if it's like sincere and genuine that, yeah, this is really destructive policy. But the best outcomes will be if there's something about the separation of power or just the judicial and congressional legislative branches wielding some power. So whether it's the court saying, yeah, this is unlawful, there's no way the president, this law grants him this much power in this kind of way and to declare anything and everything in an emergency. So whether it's a legal decision or it's Congress saying, okay, well, if this is how this law is being read, we're taking this law, we're rescinding this law because this is not what we want, this is not what we meant, we can't give this kind of power to the executive branch. So that would be the best outcome. I'm not very hopeful that Congress will do anything. I think it's more likely that the courts might do something, at least rein it. I don't think they'll say this is completely unconstitutional, but they might rein it in some kind of ways that at least make it doesn't have this much power. But it really, production is the lifeblood of a nation. And that one person can have this much power over everybody's productive activities, it should really scare people. That it's like whatever the American form of government, it couldn't have been this. It couldn't have been that one individual, the president and the whole executive branch, but he's the leader. So it's basically, it's him. Yeah, if he decides that he needs to do this, everybody's productive life is going to change. And change like in an instant. And then if he reverses, it changes again. And then if he puts it back, it changes. Like every day and week, you have to be worrying for your whole productive life. What is this one man? What's the next thing that's going to cross his mind and he's going to do about it? That is not what, if we put it one way that it was put, that what we're getting is rule of law, not rule of men. This is what the rule of men looks like. It's the arbitrary whims of, and now here of a single person. And that's it's a scary phenomenon. And there's so many, so you're rightly like thinking of cause for optimism. There's some pushback on this, but there's also a lot of support for it that I don't know, and it might not be good. And I used to be against taxes, but maybe Trump knows what he's doing, and let's just give him a chance. And that's all. Yeah, like it's okay that one person has this much power, and if he uses it for a way that I like, then that's okay. And there's in the country a lot of people going along with this, and that's part of what the real negative here is.
A republic if you can keep it, as Benjamin Franklin put it. Well, thanks, Onkar. Let's wrap up with a couple of quick resources I'd like to share with our audience. One is an essay that we've just made available online for the first time with the arrangement of publishers, America's Persecuted Minority, Big Business, a classic essay by Ayn Rand talking about how business people are targeted for persecution. She's talking about the antitrust laws in the 1960s. A lot of what she says there, though, I think could easily apply to the way tariffs are treating business people today. A second item, not on our website, but available in a paperback, now newly available paperback edition of Ayn Rand's back periodicals, is The Moratorium on Brains. And this is where Ayn Rand analyzes the price controls, 1971, of the Nixon administration, and where she says things notably like, when total economic controls are imposed by a Republican president in the name of preserving free enterprise, who among today's politicians is going to protest, and in the name of what? Lots to think about there, and parallels to reflect on with the current administration. So if you enjoy this podcast, please like, subscribe, share, leave comments, especially whether you're on YouTube or on Facebook. And if you have questions, send us an email, newideal@aynrand.org. We read everything that comes in, reply to many, and try to use your suggestions. So this is a topic I think that will be with us for a while. Onkar, I'm sure we'll comment on it again. Thanks for joining me today. Until then, we'll see you later.